Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. As we reflect on Acts chapter 27 together today, it's a bit of a different theme than what we're used to in Scripture, as we have really sailing on the sea. And that's just not a familiar part of the life of a lot of Christians. So I'll try and give you some detail that I can on this text. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly, and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea, from there we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me, and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night, there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, as they were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. As the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you.' And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. This is the word of the Lord. So what we see as we start out, the continuance of Paul's trial before Felix and then Festus and Agrippa, as they now send him off to Rome to give his account to Caesar as he requested, as he appealed. And so that's beginning. They are going to sail for Italy. Now notice in verse 1 the word we. So Luke, the author of this book, is included in the number on the ship in this chapter. He's on this journey with Paul. Other prisoners too, we're not told how many here, and a centurion named Julius, who was stationed in Syria as part of the Augustan cohort, so he has been sent along to be the head of the prisoners taken on this journey. They board a ship from Adramyttium, which is a city in Asia on the Aegean Sea. So between Asia and Mysia on the western border of Asia Minor. And essentially that boat's headed home. It's sailing for the ports along the coast of Asia. They head from Caesarea on this boat, accompanied also by Aristarchus. And Aristarchus is a fellow Christian. He has traveled with Paul many years before when they were taking the offering down to Jerusalem. He's going to be with Paul later in Rome. So they leave Caesarea and they land 100 miles north of there, roughly, at the port city of Sidon. Paul is treated kindly by the centurion, who lets his friends care for him. As they leave from Sidon, they essentially, it says under the lee of Cyprus, it's like they're using the island as a shield from the wind. And so they travel east, and then they travel north in regards to the island. They travel on the east side of it, then the north side of it. So they're staying close to land. They almost seem like they're keeping land within sight as they do this. The wind is against them. So from the very get-go, this trip on the sea has been started out difficult, and it's only going to get worse as we continue through the chapter. So from there, they head along Cilicia, Pamphylia, and into Lycia. These are really small regions, not really small. These are smaller regions on the southern border of Asia Minor up against the Mediterranean Sea. As you move from east to west, they're listed out here. So they land there in Lycia, and they find a new ship, because remember that boat was headed towards really probably the western coast. It's going to turn north and go up into the Aegean Sea in order to drop off supplies, whatever its cargo is, in those western cities, perhaps Adramyttium itself. And they want to go further west. They don't want to hit the Aegean Sea. They want to hit the Adriatic Sea to take them up toward Italy and eventually Rome. And so they change boats. The centurion takes Paul and the others aboard a new ship. And again, rough sail as they, verse 7, find difficulty in moving again. Cnidus, or Cnidus, however you want to pronounce that, the CN sound. They head towards, it's a southwest Asian city, so they haven't quite gotten to that point where they would have broken path with the previous boat. It would have gone that way too. But then they do. Because of the winds, they can't sail any more westward, so they sail south. From there, they go down around the island of Crete, using it as a shield against the wind. So first on the east side of it, then they finally head west on the south side of it, and you see them eventually finally land in a city of Lasea, not Lycia, but Lasea, so a different location. This one is on the south side of the island of Crete, right about in the middle of it. We get the note in verse 9 about what time of the year it is. The fast is already over, and it's a reference to the Day of Atonement for the Jewish people. So this is September, October-ish, and it signals that it's getting risky to sail. There are four sailing seasons at this point in history on the Mediterranean. They viewed March 10th through May 27th as being risky. May 28th through September 14th was the safe season for sailing. September 15th through November 11th was risky again. And then the really dangerous point in the year was from November 12th through March 9th. And so we've entered that third season. We're back into risky time to sail, and winter's closing in. They're running out of time here, and so Paul gives them the warning that if they go, they're going to lose everything, cargo, ship, and life. But the centurion takes sides with the ship's captain, the pilot, and the owner of the ship. Now, in fairness, you can talk to your kids about this one. I mean, right? This is a common sense kind of thing for the centurion. Who are you going to choose to believe? Are you going to listen to the prisoner? Or are you going to listen to the ship's captain and its owner, who are used to life on the sea? Who would you listen to about whether the sea was safe for sailing? So the centurion makes it an understandable choice to continue onward and not to spend the winter, but instead to continue on this journey. They hope to reach Phoenix, which would be a safe place to spend the winter season until they could then sail further. Now, we then learn that the storm continues to grow worse. So they sail along Crete some more, and you get the northeaster, which is actually in the Greek text a combination of Greek and Latin words, two directions here in a sense. That is, it's just a massive wind that has struck them, so even worse than before, and they realize they can't even fight it, and it just drives them along. So they're really like a sailboat at this point, just wherever the wind's going to take them. And now they go south, straight south from Phoenix, so they didn't make their destination there, to this tiny island called Cauda. And there, they're finally able to then start turning direction. They're afraid that they're going to hit Sirtis, which is southwest of there. It's the really northern Africa. But they're able to turn a little bit more and head more westward. Still afraid of this storm, they toss cargo overboard. They toss the ship's tackle overboard the next day. So they're suffering great loss here. The sailors, the owner of this ship, whatever their cargo was, likely grain bound for Rome. They spend many days in this terrible storm, and we're going to learn that 14th day is going to be mentioned in the text a couple of times. So they can't even see the sun or the stars, and it gets to the point where they've lost all hope. And that's one of those woe moments in the text, a surprise that these seasoned sailors, these veterans on the sea, would come to this idea that they're going to be lost, they're going to perish. They're not going to make it back from this journey. Paul seeks to encourage them in verse 21, tells them, that's a great encouragement to start, right? I told you so. You should have listened to me. But he then urges them, take heart, take comfort, be courageous. There will be no loss of life. And then he tells them he's had a vision. He's seen an angel from his God saying, do not be afraid. And that no one will die on this journey. It's a polytheistic world. They believe in multiple gods, many gods. And so for a man to stand up and say he's received a vision from his God, while not necessarily common, would be within their worldview of how stuff works. Hey, this guy's God's going to stand up for us. This is great. So that could actually give some courage to the men on that ship. We'll see. Verse 27 mentions that they were driven across the Adriatic Sea. As you look at the boundaries of the Adriatic Sea on a map today, we wouldn't look at it this way. Really, it's essentially south of the Adriatic Sea that they're driven along. The Adriatic Sea for us is in between Italy and then Greece, that area there, and northward of it as well. So, yeah, just a bit of a different context, but they're driven southward, westward, but south of the Adriatic Sea is a fair way to kind of look at this. The sailors know that they're nearing land, and they start taking measurements of the depth of the water, and they realize it's getting smaller. It's nighttime, so they cannot see. Not a good time to try and bring the boat in safely, and so they start seeking escape. They're letting down the ship's boat, pretending to be letting down the anchors, hoping that they can get away safely. And Paul tells the centurion that essentially God's promise banks on everybody staying together. And so the centurion has the soldiers cut the ropes. And that extra boat, that little lifeboat, the escape hatch for the sailors, is gone. The centurion is now willing to trust Paul in this text. Verse 34, Paul urges them to take food and reminds them of the promise of his God that not a hair on their head is going to perish. That's a pretty specific promise there. Verse 35, you can ask your kids about what it sounds like. Took bread, giving thanks, broke it, and ate. It sounds like the pattern of the Lord's Supper. We shouldn't expect that this is the Lord's Supper, but just that similarity there is worth pointing out. Anytime we can talk to our kids about the Lord's Supper and encourage them in that way is a good thing. Verse 37, again, Luke pointing out he's there, as well as the total number of people being 276 on this boat. They've eaten. They throw the remainder of the wheat into the sea. So they are continuing to try to lighten this boat, lighten the load so that they can make it safely to land. They see a bay with a beach, hoping they can run ashore, but they hit a reef. That reef is going to end up breaking apart the boat, and the boat is sinking. The soldiers plan to kill the prisoners. It is a Roman capital offense for a prisoner to escape if you let a prisoner escape. So the soldiers, if these prisoners get away, believe they're going to be executed for it. But again, the centurion stands up for Paul, and not just Paul, but all of the prisoners. So the centurion here, doing a good thing, allows them to live and orders everyone, and they listen in terms of not just letting the prisoners live, but also to how to survive this and get back to the land, either by swimming or by staying aboard pieces of broken ship and just drifting. And they all survive, just as Paul had said. So we're going to see more about the results of this shipwreck as we join together tomorrow for the final chapter of the book of Acts.